Our next song is number 600, O Thou in Whose Presence. Thank you, Mike, for that beautiful version of this that you just played.
This morning we are having a dramatization of our scripture, which is 1 Samuel 28, verses 3 to 25. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel mourned him and buried him in Ramah, his hometown. And Saul had banned all mediums and diviners from the land. The Philistines gathered their forces and advanced to camp at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was so afraid that his heart beat wildly. When Saul questioned the Lord didn't answer him, not by dreams, not by the Urim, and not by the prophets. So Saul said to his servants,
"Find me a woman who communicates with ghosts. Then I'll go to her and ask her by using her techniques."
"There is such a medium in Endor," his servants replied. So Paul disguised himself, dressing in different clothes. Then he and 2 men set out, going to the woman at nighttime.
"Please call up for me a ghost. Bring me the one I specify."
Listen, you know what Saul has done. How he has banned all the mediums and the diviners from the land. What are you doing? Trying to get me killed?
"As surely as the Lord lives, you will not get in trouble for this."
So the woman said,
Who do you want me to bring up for you?
"Bring up Samuel."
When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed at Saul.
What have you done? You've hurt me. You are Saul.
Don't be afraid. What do you see?
I see a God coming up from the ground. An old man coming up.
What does he look like?
He's wrapped in a long robe.
Then Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed low out of respect, nose to the ground.
Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?
I'm in deep trouble. The Philistines are at war with me, and God has turned away from me and no longer answers me by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what I should do.
Why do you ask me? Since the Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy. The Lord has done to you exactly what he spoke through me. The Lord has ripped the kingdom out of your hands and has given it to your friend David. The Lord has done this very thing to you today because you didn't listen to the Lord. And you didn't carry out his fierce anger against the Amalekites. The Lord will now hand over both you and Israel to the Philistines. And come tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will hand Israel's army over to the Philistines.
Saul immediately fell full length on the ground, utterly terrified at what Samuel had said. He was weak because he hadn't eaten anything all day or night. The woman approached Saul, and after seeing how scared he was, she said,
Listen, your servant has obeyed you. I risked my life and did what you told me to do. Now it's your turn to listen to me, your servant. Let me give you a bit of food. Eat it. Then you'll have the strength to go on your way.
But Saul refused.
I can't eat.
But his servants and the woman urged him to do so, and so he did. He got up off the ground and sat on a couch. The woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she quickly butchered it. She took flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread. She served this to Saul and his servants, and they ate. They got up and left that very night.
Have you ever heard of main character syndrome? Where a character in a book or a movie, even if they are the main character, acts like they are the only character? Or the author maybe writes them like no other character's arc in the story matters. While most stories do center on a main character, any story on the page or screen benefits from acting as though each named person or character speaking matters, as though they are a fully fleshed out person with their own wants and needs, and that their inclusion is integral to the story. Why are they here? Why should we care about them? Even well-written, unnamed characters should be more than plot devices or scenery. They should pique our curiosity and make us wonder what else is going on that the audience doesn't get to see about them. The book of Samuel conveniently splits into parts 1 and 2 by some later scribe, but very much altogether tells the story of David. He is the main character. No, he's not the person that the book is named after. Yes, we have several background chapters before we get to David that describe the tribes of Israel before they demanded a king, and those chapters center on the prophet Samuel, the last leader of the Hebrew people before the kingdom model of government. Then the focus shifts to Saul, the first king, and his ups and downs, but David comes on the scene pretty quickly as a foil for Saul. The story almost reads as David propaganda in this section. Clearly, in this power struggle between Saul, the existing king, and David, the promised king, we're supposed to root for David. But in the middle of this Saul-David conflict, we get a series of snapshots into some really interesting characters that are around these two kings. And today I am focusing on one of the most interesting, to me anyway, an unnamed character who has long held my attention and who many of you may not even have encountered before. Commonly, she is known as the Witch of Endor. Here's what little we know about her. She lives in Endor, a city assigned to the tribe of Issachar, but for some reason well within the territory of the tribe of Manasseh. And we know she practices some kind of magic, and she is known as a medium. We don't know her ethnicity exactly, but with the fear she expresses about doing a seance, lest Saul should kill her for it, we can assume that she lives under the jurisdiction of Saul, and therefore considers herself part of the kingdom of Israel. She knows Israelite religious laws. She cares about the laws because she's affected by them. If she was a Canaanite and living in an area controlled by the Philistines or other Canaanite people, Saul's power and the influence of Israelite laws wouldn't matter to her. It is her fearful reaction to Saul that makes me think she is part of the people of Israel. After all, before the Israelites were exiled to Assyria and Babylon, much of the Israelite population was not as practically monotheistic as we might imagine. I'm not even going to go into all the prophets' prohibitions against worshiping Baal and Asherah, and I'll stick with just the references to kinds of witchcraft in the Torah. As early as Exodus, we have an injunction from Moses that reads in the King James, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." I said it that way because it sounds dramatic. The CEB renders it as female sorcerer, which makes me wonder if the injunction has as much to do with the gender of the practitioner as it does with the arts being practiced. But this isn't the only prohibition in the Torah to practicing magic. Leviticus 19 has God saying to Moses the desire that the Israelites be holy, for I am holy. Be separate, be different, be set apart from the nations around you. So, verses 26 to 31 read in part, "You must not participate in divination or fortune telling. Do not cut your bodies for the dead or mark yourselves. Do not resort to dead spirits or inquire of spirits for divination. You will be made unclean by them, or rather, you will be ritually impure from your syncretism. You won't be special if you're doing what everyone else is doing. You won't be distinctly mine." Leviticus 20, verse 9 adds some consequences to these no-nos. "I will also oppose anyone who resorts to dead spirits, or I will cut such an individual off from their people," which is pretty strong language, opposing, cutting people off from the people. And then in verse 27, "Is someone, whether male or female, is a medium with the dead, they must be executed." Deuteronomy 18 says much the same, but adds a little bit more of why. Yes, separation from the nations around them is still an issue, but also God seems to acknowledge here that the point of magic, of divination and sciences, is for humans to access God or God's power or knowledge through human means and on human terms, whereas God only approves methods of communication that God initiates, like prophets and visions, and the priestly Urim and Thummim, the magic 8-ball-like yes or no stones. God doesn't appreciate being manipulated into giving out the plot ahead of time. If God doesn't have anything to say to you, don't go trying to get God's unlisted cell phone number off some sketchy website. You might get ripped off, and you might be putting more of your information out there in the interwebs than you want. And there are some things you might be better off not knowing, like hearing a prediction that you and your sons and many of your soldiers are going to die the next day in battle. I say all this for a few reasons. First, clearly, if the text has to prohibit divination and magic this much, people were doing it. You don't have an anti-smoking campaign because smoking is unpopular. There is no anti-glass munching campaign. You don't have to tell people to stop doing what they're already not doing. From the early days of the Israelite corporate identity through the monarchy, some Hebrews were practicing magic alongside their worship of Yahweh. And people were seeking out these magical practitioners to access information or to access loved ones that were lost to them. Two, I want to point out that while Saul might not have been able to read, and while the Torah might not have been in its current form yet, if any part of it had been written, there were some pretty strong injunctions against magic practitioners in the oral tradition that Saul had chosen to enact. Death is a real possibility for this woman who is ostensibly practicing something that is part of an ancient Israelite culture. I'm not going so far as to say if everyone else jumps off a bridge, logic that our parents are warning kids away from. The logic that because a practice is common, it is therefore right, is not what I'm trying to say. But I do want us to consider that this woman is not a monster. She's not just a spooky plot device intended only to show how far Saul has fallen. I want us to see that she is, in fact, a person, first and foremost, and a medium, second, and that she is not so uncommon in her extracurricular religious practice of speaking to the dead. The text wants to paint her in shadows, to shock us with her strangeness and association with alternative lifestyle. She almost cackles and haunts us from the page. Fear her difference, fear her association with the dead and the punishment of death that hangs over her, fear her association with the night and secret prohibited rituals. I want to remove the warts and the hunchback and the green face paint and see a human. See her as Hester Prynne from The Scarlet Letter, if you like, a woman likely without a lot of options, trying to make her way in the world, surrounded by an unforgiving but nevertheless dependent community. A woman with a little bit of illicit religious power in a society that doesn't often give that sacred task to women. Deborah was given such sacred power by her community in her time, but she's the exception that proves the rule. How many prophetesses from Scripture can you name? Also, I want to make a further connection for you that I didn't know, and so likely you wouldn't have either. And I wonder if, I don't know, but I wonder if maybe there's some meaning in this connection that can also further humanize our woman of Endor. Psalm 83 tells us that Sisera and King Jabin were destroyed at Endor. Those were the antagonists in the Deborah story. They were destroyed at Endor, where they became fertilizer to the ground. Same location. Deborah and Barak's battle and Saul's last stand both happen in the valley of Jezreel. In Deborah and Barak's case, the story of the battle ends with a death in Endor, and in Saul's case, the battle story is preceded by communion with the dead in Endor before moving on to the battle. For the people of Israel, the Jewish people who have lived on the land for centuries and knew the geography, would these two stories have overlapped? Would they have heard the ghosts of Deborah and Jael invoked in this story of the medium of Endor? Could these two stories have something to say to each other about the role of women in Israelite society and how God chose to work through these two unlikely vessels, Deborah and this woman? This woman who was likely woken up in the middle of the night instead of a creature of the night who was lurking until a victim came along. A woman who is part of the community, serving a role in helping grieving people deal with loss, however effective her rituals actually were or how altruistic her motives. I want us to consider that she might have had a family. Did she have a husband or adult sons who were living, or was she on her own? Did she maybe start trying to contact the dead to deal with her own loss? Was calling up the dead a means of supporting herself in a society that didn't give women without male relatives many avenues to earn their way in the world? Would we feel more comfortable with her if she had chosen prostitution as a profession instead? And I want us to think a little bit about our own relationship with dubious sources of information. Have you ever thought about how talking to AI is kind of like holding a seance? I had not. But let me tell you, in my studies this week, I was struggling to find commentaries for this passage. Surprise, surprise. So late in this week, I turned to the internet to see if popular progressive theologian and author Rachel Held Evans had ever written a chapter or even a blog post on the Witch of Endor. And AI delivered. It summoned up a 2014 blog post titled "The Witch of Endor and the End of the World," and it even gave me a short, helpful synopsis of this very blog post and its salient points, which were ironically very similar to my own take on this passage. Would you like to guess the problem? It didn't exist. I am suspicious of AI, and on the rare occasions I use it, I look up its sources. So I ended up looking up Rachel Held Evans' 2014 blog post, "The Witch of Endor and the End of the World," and I could not find this blog post. I searched for it multiple ways. I then looked up Rachel's blog and went through every 2014 blog post looking for this title and subject matter and found nothing. Nothing. As a final resort, I went back to Madame Google's dimly lit parlor and asked her to call up for me the 2014 blog post, "The Witch of Endor and the End of the World." And this time, I was told no such article exists. I couldn't help but make a connection between me, as Saul, coming to an illicit medium I swear to not use, AI in my case, looking for hidden information that I cannot find using my regular sources, and asking that medium to summon up for me the words of a spiritual mentor dead these last 7 years because Rachel Held Evans died in 2019, and being presented with this apparition of Rachel Held Evans. We just can't trust everything that AI summons for us. Consulting mediums isn't just for Saul back in the day, it's something that we have to think about as well. Where is this artificial intelligence drawing its info from, and what do we do with what it brings up? I don't want to get tied up in the how of the medium's seance for Samuel this morning. There's lots of interesting discussions on that, but I'm not looking to explore that in this sermon, whether it really was the ghost of Samuel or an evil spirit, whether she had occult powers or whether she was a fraud. What I want to examine, those are all interesting questions, but what I want to examine, what I am drawn to, is something more concrete, something as plainly verifiable in the story as the printed verse numbers. My concern is with how our medium responds to Saul. The wildest part of this story to me is not the nighttime cloak and dagger routine Saul pulls, nor the macabre spectacle of witches and ghosts. The wildest part to me is that this woman, called upon in the middle of the night to perform an illegal act that she doesn't want to do, who has to be reassured twice that she won't be killed for this by the very man who instated the law calling for the death of people like her, somehow sees her oppressor's humanity, his brokenness, his desperation and despair, his loneliness and exhaustion, and responds to him with compassion. Friends, I really think that she is an Old Testament Good Samaritan. Think about the parallels. Jesus sets up a switcheroo story where a Jewish man is not helped by the normal religious authorities of priest or Levite, but by an outsider, a Samaritan, considered inferior for their refusal to accept any scriptures as valid other than the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's it. What else do you need? They had their own traditions. They worshipped at Mount Gerizim rather than Mount Zion. They were every bit as complicated in their outsider on the rim status within Judaism as this woman in Endor. While Samaritans weren't necessarily seen as evil and scary, just misguided or foolish, they still were an unlikely and unwelcome source of help to Jesus' audience. Here, too, we have an unlikely and unwelcome source of help. Saul is reluctant to accept help from her, and part of that might be his despair, but part of his reluctance might as well be pride. He is called for the death of people like this woman, and here he is asking for her help for the very practice he outlawed. And then she's trying to feed him? And not just feed him, she's literally slaying the fattened calf for him. Like the father does for the prodigal son, like Abraham does for his angelic visitors on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah. This is an extravagant gift. You fatten a calf for a special occasion, for a holiday, or a wedding, or an anticipated and beloved guest. That calf was specifically chosen to be fattened up. And whoever that woman intended to fatten that calf for, it wasn't Saul. And butchering that animal is not a fast process, no matter what the text says. She is really going out of her way for the ruler who is litigating her extermination. She's living in hiding. Maybe she's staying home and keeping her kids home from school. Maybe she's depending on a kindly neighbor to provide sanctuary. Maybe she's withdrawing into her most trusted community for support. Maybe she's considered moving out of her native land because she doesn't feel safe there anymore. She doesn't owe Saul anything. She's probably spent many sleepless nights worrying about such a scenario where Saul or his soldiers find her out, come to her door, and carry out the execution they've threatened. It would be understandable if she emulated Jael from last week's sermon and nailed Saul's head to the ground with a tent peg while he's laid out on the floor before her and unwilling to get up. She would have saved herself in a way. Samuel already predicted King Saul is about to lose his crown and that he and his sons and his army are going to die the next day. But she is moved to compassion. She is the most tender and humane person in this passage, full of profoundly sad, lost people. This outsider provides Saul with his last meal. She acts as his hospice nurse, caring for the king at the end of his life. She sees, the text tells us, she sees him. She sees his fear, his despair, and his overwhelmedness, and she responds with softness. She mothers him, telling him essentially, now you listen to me, encouraging him to get up, to eat, to gather his strength, and to face his fate with courage. I want us to be this woman in this passage. I want us to be able to see the humanity of our enemies. I want us to be moved to compassion for the people we disagree with and even for the people oppressing us. It would certainly be understandable that we can't or don't get to that point. I'm not mandating compassion. I don't think you can. But I recognize this woman that even the text wants to highlight as a scary figure. I recognize that she is the gentlest, most loving person in this section. Who is in your sphere of influence today whose external markers you struggle to see past to get to the central nugget of humanity? Who do you want to grow in compassion for? Or if that's a bridge too far to find compassion for someone with power over us, can we find compassion for someone our society doesn't value and who we struggle to see as a fully fledged person on their own, in their own story? How do we other people? People we disagree with, people we find scary or incomprehensible, people of a specific faith, perhaps, that we find dangerous, or traditions that we see with suspicion, or people with identities that we don't understand. Where can we hold onto the common image of God that we all share? Where do we emulate this woman of Endor and choose to see and respond to human need? God cares about how we act towards other people, how we respond to their heartbreak and physical needs, far more than about the orthodoxy of our religious beliefs and observance. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Who is a neighbor in this story? The woman of Endor. May God give us all the strength to break open our hearts and see the humanity and the needs of those around us, and may God give us the compassion to do something about it.
Our response hymn is number 732, Open My Eyes. Would you please stand in body or spirit?